This wasn't supposed to be possible. That's the part that should make everyone stop scrolling. Venezuela was not just another weak state. It was supposed to be protected, layered, insulated, wrapped inside what many analysts openly called a Russian security bubble. Russian advisors on the ground, Russian intelligence watching the skies, Russian air defenses, surveillance systems, and electronic warfare assets standing between Washington and Caracas. And yet, in a matter of hours, American forces went in, extracted Nicolas Maduro and his wife, and left before Moscow could meaningfully react. This was not a warning shot. It was not a message delivered through diplomacy. It was a demonstration that cut straight through years of Russian investment, planning, and prestige in Latin America. Because Venezuela was never just about Venezuela. It was Russia's proof that it could protect its allies, even in America's backyard. And that proof just collapsed on live television. When great powers fail, they usually fail quietly. This wasn't quiet. This was operational, visible, and devastating to credibility. American aircraft struck, ground forces landed, intelligence pinpointed targets, and extraction was completed without triggering a direct confrontation. That alone raises a question that now echoes far beyond Caracas. If Russia couldn't stop this, what exactly can it stop? The most dangerous moments in geopolitics aren't when rivals shout at each other. They're when one side discovers the other side's red lines are thinner than advertised. What happened in Caracas wasn't just an operation, it was a test. And the result sent a shockwave through every capital that relies on Russian protection, every intelligence service reassessing American reach, and every strategist wondering whether the balance of power just tilted in a way we haven't fully absorbed yet. To understand why this shocked so many professionals, you have to understand what Venezuela was supposed to look like before the operation. For years, Caracas had been one of Moscow's most heavily supported partners in the Western Hemisphere. This wasn't symbolic cooperation. It was physical, technical, and deeply embedded. Russian military advisors operated alongside Venezuelan forces. Russian intelligence personnel monitored threats. Russian technicians maintained advanced systems designed explicitly to deter American intervention. On paper, this was a hardened target. Venezuela fielded Russian-made S-300 air defense systems, advanced fighter aircraft, electronic warfare capabilities, and secure communications infrastructure. Beyond hardware, Russia helped build intelligence collection nodes, surveillance coverage around key government facilities, and protective details for senior regime figures, including Nicolas Maduro himself. Contractors believed to be linked to Russian private military networks, often associated with the Wagner ecosystem, were reportedly involved in close protection and security coordination. The message was clear. This regime was under Moscow's shield. And then the shield failed. American forces didn't attempt a mass invasion. There was no prolonged air campaign. Instead, the operation unfolded as a tightly scoped strike. Limited air action, ground elements inserted with precision. Targets identified, isolated, and removed. Extraction completed before Russian-linked systems or personnel could mount a coordinated response. From a military standpoint, that sequence is devastating because it bypasses the very threats those defenses were built to stop. This wasn't a case of defenses being overwhelmed. It was a case of defenses being avoided, blinded, or rendered irrelevant at the decisive moment. And that distinction matters. It suggests not just superior firepower, but superior understanding of layouts, routines, blind spots, and decision chains. In other words, the operation didn't defeat the security bubble head on. It went around it, under it, and possibly straight through gaps no one in Moscow believed existed. The implications were immediate. If Venezuela, thousands of miles from Russia, equipped and advised for years, could not prevent a U.S. operation, then the assumption that Russian security guarantees extend reliably beyond rhetoric took a direct hit. This wasn't a failure of courage. It was a failure of capability, alignment, or both. There are several ways this could have gone wrong for Russia, and every single one of them is alarming. What's important is that none of these explanations cancel each other out. The most likely answer is that multiple failures overlapped at exactly the wrong moment, creating an opening the United States was ready to exploit. The first and most unsettling possibility is deep intelligence penetration. For an operation like this to succeed, American planners needed precise, real-time knowledge, where the target would be, when defenses were thinnest, which routes were monitored and which weren't. That level of detail doesn't come from satellites alone. It requires human sources inside the security apparatus, possibly inside the inner circle, and potentially even within Russian-linked security operations themselves. If that's true, it means years of Russian counterintelligence efforts failed to detect or neutralize those sources. That's not a tactical mistake. That's a structural weakness. The second possibility is misaligned defensive thinking. Russian security planning was likely focused on stopping a conventional military intervention, large formations, sustained air campaigns, amphibious landings. That's what systems like long-range air defenses are designed to counter. But that's not what happened. The American approach was surgical, special operations forces, limited, precise strikes, short timelines, minimal signatures. If Russian defenses were optimized for the wrong kind of war, then they were never positioned to stop the one that actually arrived. Then there's electronic warfare. The United States possesses some of the most advanced EW capabilities in the world. Jamming, spoofing, cyber intrusion, and temporary blinding of sensors can create narrow windows where even sophisticated systems simply can't see or communicate. If those tools were used effectively, Russian and Venezuelan defenses may have been functionally blind at the critical moment, not destroyed, just neutralized long enough for the operation to succeed. The most uncomfortable possibility for Moscow is restraint. If Russian personnel on the ground recognized what was happening and chose not to intervene, the implications are severe. Engaging American forces would risk direct confrontation between nuclear-armed powers. That's not a local firefight. That's escalation with global consequences. If the decision was made to stand down rather than escalate, it suggests that protecting this ally was not worth that risk. And if that's the case, then Russia's security guarantees come with an unspoken condition. They stop short when the United States is fully committed. Finally, there's the human factor. Corruption, complacency, poor coordination, or simple incompetence. No security system is immune to these failures. If American intelligence identified and exploited gaps created by bribery, fatigue, or bureaucratic friction between Russian advisors and local forces, the result would look exactly like what we saw. A defense that existed on paper but failed in practice. Each of these explanations is damaging on its own. Together, they form a nightmare scenario. Because regardless of which combination is correct, the outcome is the same. A supposedly protected environment was breached, and that breach was clean enough to succeed before anyone could stop it. For Russia, the most dangerous consequence of this operation isn't what happened in Caracas, it's what every Allied capital inferred from it. Security guarantees don't fail in theory, they fail in demonstration. And this was a demonstration watched closely by regimes that rely on Moscow, not just for weapons, but for survival. For years, Russia positioned itself as the alternative security provider to the West. The pitch was simple: partner with Moscow and you gain protection against American pressure. Venezuela was supposed to be the proof point, a regime openly hostile to Washington, sitting in America's backyard, shielded by Russian systems and personnel. If Russia could protect Caracas, it could protect anyone. That narrative just took a direct hit. Consider the signal this sends to leaders in Damascus, Bamako, Bangui, and beyond. If Russia couldn't prevent a U.S. operation against Nicolas Maduro, operating far from Russia's core territory, what does that say about its ability to shield others when the United States is fully committed? In places like Syria, where Bashar al-Assad depends heavily on Russian backing, the question isn't abstract, it's existential. Allies don't expect perfection. They expect reliability. This operation introduced doubt where confidence once existed. Even if Russian protection works against regional threats, insurgencies, or neighboring rivals, it now appears far less reliable against American special operations, intelligence penetration, and electronic warfare. That distinction matters enormously because most regimes don't fear their neighbors as much as they fear Washington. In Africa, where Russian influence expanded rapidly through security agreements, advisors, and private military contractors, the implications are just as serious. Governments there are pragmatic, they hedge, they don't abandon partners overnight, but they adjust expectations. After Caracas, relying exclusively on Russian protection looks riskier. Diversification becomes rational. Keeping channels open with Washington suddenly looks less like weakness and more like insurance. This is how credibility erodes, not through speeches, but through quiet recalculations. Russia didn't just lose face, it lost leverage. And leverage, once lost, is difficult to regain because it depends on belief, not hardware. If the failure of Russian protection shook its allies, the success of this operation forced a different, equally uncomfortable realization across the world. American power, despite years of predictions about decline, remains deeply asymmetric when it chooses to act. What happened in Caracas was not luck. It was not improvisation. It was the result of capabilities that have been built, refined, and quietly integrated over decades. First, this operation exposed the persistence of American intelligence, even in an environment saturated with counterintelligence, surveillance, and foreign security personnel. U.S. agencies maintained access. That means human sources that were not compromised, technical collection that was not detected, and operational security tight enough to survive Russian scrutiny. For adversaries who believed American intelligence had been degraded or distracted, this was a rude awakening. The system still works. And it works in places it is explicitly being pushed out of. Second, the operation highlighted the unmatched effectiveness of U.S. Special Operations Forces. Units widely believed to include elements of Joint Special Operations Command operated in a defended urban environment under the shadow of Russian-advised security and executed a capture and extract mission without triggering escalation. That combination is extraordinarily rare. It requires not just elite troops, but flawless coordination between intelligence, aviation, cyber capabilities, and command structures. Very few countries can even attempt this. Fewer still can pull it off. Third, and most importantly, this revealed the depth of American systems integration. Intelligence agencies, special forces, electronic warfare units, air assets, cyber operations, and diplomatic messaging all moved as one machine. There were no visible seams, no public confusion, no contradictory signals. That level of integration is not flashy, but it is decisive. It allows the United States to create brief windows of dominance in places where permanent dominance is impossible. And in modern warfare, windows are often enough. But this is where the story becomes more complicated. Power demonstrated this clearly is never free. The same operation that showcased American capability also exposed American vulnerability. Acting this decisively commits Washington to outcomes it may not fully control. Venezuela's future instability, regional fallout, and legal implications don't disappear once the mission ends. They become American problems. Power, when exercised, creates responsibility whether it is welcomed or not. So what the world just witnessed was not pure triumph. It was a reminder that the United States still possesses tools its rivals cannot reliably counter, but also that every use of those tools accelerates strategic consequences that linger long after the helicopters leave. This is the part of the story that doesn't fit neatly into victory narratives, because while the operation succeeded tactically, it imposed costs that don't show up in after-action reports. And those costs are now locked in. Washington doesn't get to walk away from them. First, there is the legal and normative cost. An operation like this, carried out inside a sovereign state without consent, cuts directly against the rules-based international order the United States claims to defend. Allies may privately admire the capability, but publicly they take notes. Precedents matter. When Washington demonstrates that it will act unilaterally if it deems the stakes high enough, it weakens its own arguments against similar behavior by others. Moscow and Beijing will cite this moment repeatedly. Second, there is the strategic entanglement problem. By removing Nicolas Maduro, the United States didn't just end a chapter. It opened a new one. Power vacuums don't stay empty. Venezuela is now Washington's problem, whether it wants that role or not. Political instability, internal power struggles, economic collapse, refugee flows, regional spillover. These are no longer abstract risks. They are inherited responsibilities. Third, there is the escalation risk. Russia did not respond militarily this time, but restraint today doesn't guarantee restraint tomorrow. Every operation like this forces adversaries to adapt. That adaptation rarely comes in the same domain. It may come through cyber retaliation, proxy actions elsewhere, arms transfers, or asymmetric pressure in regions where U.S. interests are exposed. Strategic revenge doesn't need to be immediate to be effective. Finally, there is the cost to perception management. Demonstrating overwhelming capability accelerates balancing behavior. Countries that once believed they could rely on American restraint will reconsider. Those already wary of U.S. dominance will feel vindicated. The paradox of power is that its most impressive demonstrations often motivate others to work harder to limit it. Washington accepted all of this knowingly. That tells us something important. This operation wasn't just about Venezuela, it was about signaling resolve in a broader contest. And when a state is willing to accept this level of risk, it suggests leaders believe the alternative inaction was worse. Once the dust settled in Caracas, strategists didn't ask whether the operation was legal or moral. They asked a colder question. Where else does this logic apply? Because great power competition is not judged by statements, but by transferable lessons. And the lesson many capitals took from Venezuela is that Russian-backed security environments are not as impermeable as advertised when the United States is fully committed. Start with Syria. Unlike Venezuela, Syria sits much closer to Russia's core strategic interests. Moscow maintains air bases, a naval facility, integrated air defenses, and thousands of personnel on the ground. The stakes are higher, and so is the risk of escalation. But the underlying dynamics are uncomfortable for Moscow. If American intelligence could penetrate regime security in Caracas, analysts now openly question whether similar penetration exists around Bashar al-Assad. Capability is not the constraint, will is. Syria matters more to Russia than Venezuela, which means Moscow might respond differently, but the assumption that Russian systems can automatically block US special operations no longer look solid. Ukraine presents a different calculus. This is Russia's core security zone. Forces are denser. Nuclear escalation looms over every decision. Yet even here, the Caracas operation introduces unease. If American special operations and intelligence can function inside Russian-influenced environments, what does that imply for high-value targets far from the front line? The answer doesn't change battlefield realities overnight, but it adds pressure to Russian planning and confidence, especially beyond conventional combat zones. Africa may feel the impact most immediately. Over the past decade, Russia expanded influence across the continent through security agreements, advisors, and private military networks. Many governments turned to Moscow believing it offered protection without Western strings attached. After Venezuela, those assumptions are being reassessed. If Russia could not prevent an American operation against Nicolas Maduro, leaders in Africa have to ask whether Russian guarantees would hold up under similar pressure. The likely response isn't abandonment, it's hedging, diversifying partners, keeping doors open. China is watching closely as well. Beijing's intelligence services are undoubtedly dissecting every aspect of this operation, not just to understand how it was done, but to ensure it can't be replicated against Chinese interests or allies. The takeaway for Beijing is mixed. On one hand, it confirms American operational reach. On the other, it reinforces China's belief that avoiding direct confrontation while building long-term resilience is the smarter path. What unites these theaters is uncertainty. Russia's deterrence posture abroad just became less convincing. American reach just became more visible. And every actor involved is now recalculating risk, not based on theory, but on a real-world breach that actually happened. Zoom out far enough, and this operation stops looking like a regional incident and starts looking like a stress test of the global order itself. What happened in Caracas cuts straight through the popular narrative that the world has already settled into a clean multipolar balance. It hasn't. What we're actually watching is a transition period, messy, unstable, and defined by contradictions. Russia can contest the United States in areas close to its borders. Ukraine proves that. It can impose costs, prolong wars, and complicate Western plans. But Venezuela exposed a hard limit. When competition moves far from Russia's core security zone, And when the United States commits fully, Moscow's ability to block American action drops sharply. That doesn't mean Russia is weak. It means its power is regional, not global in the way it often claims. The United States, by contrast, still possesses global reach. Intelligence networks built over decades, alliances that provide access and basing, special operations forces capable of operating almost anywhere, integrated systems that allow rapid, complex missions with minimal footprint. These advantages are eroding, but they have not disappeared. Caracas was proof that the erosion is incomplete. But here's the paradox. Every time the United States demonstrates this kind of capability, it accelerates the forces working against it. Allies grow uneasy, rivals adapt faster. Neutral states hedge more aggressively. Demonstrations of dominance don't freeze the system in place, they destabilize it. They push others to find workarounds, counters, and alternatives. In that sense, power becomes self-consuming. The more visibly it is used, the faster others organize to limit it. This is why the Venezuela operation is strategically double-edged. It showed that American hegemony is not gone, but it also showed why it cannot last indefinitely. The same action that humiliated Russian security also reinforced global perceptions of American unilateralism, and those perceptions matter. They shape long-term alignment decisions in ways that no single operation can control. So the real question isn't whether the United States can still breach a rival's security bubble. It's how often it can afford to do so before the cumulative costs outweigh the benefits. Because in a transitioning system, every show of strength carries the seed of future resistance. History will not remember this operation for its tactical brilliance alone. It will remember it for what it revealed about the moment we are living in, a moment when power still works, but no longer without consequence. A moment when deterrence holds in some places, collapses in others, and forces every actor to confront uncomfortable truths about their limits. For Russia, the lesson is brutal. Security guarantees only matter when they are tested, and this one failed under pressure. Allies will not abandon Moscow overnight, but they will remember Caracas. They will factor it into every future calculation. Credibility, once cracked, never fully returns. For United States, the lesson is more complicated. The operation proved that American reach remains formidable, that intelligence, penetration, special operations, and systems integration still give Washington options its rivals struggle to counter. But it also underscored the cost of exercising that power. Every decisive action narrows diplomatic space. Every precedent invites imitation. Every demonstration of dominance accelerates balancing behavior. And for the rest of the world, this wasn't about choosing sides. It was about reassessing reality. The global order is not yet truly multipolar, but it is no longer comfortably unipolar either. We are in between. And in that space between orders, actions matter more than rhetoric. Capabilities matter more than promises. Outcomes matter more than intentions. The story is not over. The consequences of Caracas will ripple outward for years, shaping alliances, doctrines, and decisions in ways we won't fully see until the next crisis tests another supposed red line. History will judge whether this operation delayed decline, accelerated it, or simply exposed it. What is already clear is this: once a security bubble is breached in full view of the world, no one ever looks at power the same way again.